Never rent a basement apartment without asking who lived there before you. Marcus learned this the hard way when he found a place for $400 a month, no credit check, no questions asked. The landlord had only one rule: never open the locked laundry room door. But Marcus was smart, rational, the kind of guy who needed answers. And when the sounds started coming from behind that door, shuffling, dragging, something that sounded almost like breathing, his need to know became an obsession he couldn't ignore. What he found inside was never supposed to be found. Marcus Chen had exactly 48 hours before he'd be living out of his car. The eviction notice sat on his passenger seat, crumpled from how many times he'd read it, as if the words would change. They didn't. Vacate premises within 48 hours or face legal action. 3 months ago, he'd been fine working part-time at the campus bookstore, keeping his head above water. Barely. Then the bookstore closed. Budget. Cuts, they said. Sorry, they said, as if sorry paid rent. Now, at 22 years old, Marcus was staring down the barrel of homelessness in the middle of his senior year. Everything he'd worked for 4 years of late nights, student loans that would haunt him for decades, the promise of being the first in his family to graduate college, all of it was about to collapse because he couldn't find a place to sleep. He'd spent the last week hunting. Every apartment listing, every roommate wanted ad, every basement suite and converted garage within 20 miles of campus. Too expensive, too far, already taken. The affordable places had waiting lists 3 months long. The close places wanted first month, last month, security deposit, and a credit score he didn't have. His phone was filled with unanswered messages, polite rejections, and the growing certainty that he was completely screwed. That's when he found the Craigslist ad. It was buried on page 7 of the housing listings, posted just 11 minutes earlier. Basement suite, $400 a month, available immediately. No credit check, quiet tenant preferred. $400. Marcus's heart actually skipped. The cheapest place he'd seen all week was $800, and that one had black mold growing up the walls. He clicked the ad 3 times to make sure it was real. The description was bare bones. Furnished basement suite in a quiet neighborhood with a bedroom, bathroom, and kitchenette. Utilities included. Month-to-month lease. Must be respectful of house rules. Call for viewing. There was no photo, no address, just a phone number. Marcus told himself it was probably a scam, or a dump, or both. $400 in this market? Something had to be wrong with it. Maybe it flooded, maybe it was the size of a closet, maybe the quiet neighborhood was code for active crime scene. But beggars couldn't be choosers, and Marcus was well past begging. He was 48 hours from sleeping in a parking lot. He called the number. The phone rang twice before a man answered with an older voice, careful and measured, asking if Marcus was calling about the suite. Marcus confirmed that he was, trying not to sound desperate, and asked if it was still available. The man said it was, then asked how soon Marcus could view it. Marcus told him he could come right now, and the man paused before agreeing to text the address, asking if Marcus could be there in 30 minutes. Marcus was already starting his car, telling the man he'd be there in 20. What Marcus didn't know was that 3 other people had called about that ad in the past 6 months. All of them had moved in. None of them had moved out. The house looked aggressively normal. Marcus pulled up to a 2-story suburban home on a tree-lined street, the kind of place where people mowed their lawns on Saturdays and knew their neighbors' names. Pale yellow siding, white trim, a small front porch with a wooden rocking chair. Nothing about it screamed a $400 basement apartment. If anything, it looked like the kind of house that would rent for twice what Marcus could afford. He sat in his car for a moment, waiting for the catch to reveal itself. But the neighborhood was quiet, the house was neat, and his eviction notice was still crumpled on the passenger seat. He got out. The front door opened before he could knock. The man standing there was in his mid-60s, average height, thinning gray hair, wearing a cardigan that looked like it came from a different decade. His face was lined but kind, the sort of face that belonged to someone's grandfather. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He greeted Marcus by name, confirming he was Mr. Dietrich, and invited him inside, explaining that the entrance to the suite was through the house. Marcus followed him through the main floor, dated but clean, with floral wallpaper, old furniture, and the faint smell of coffee mixed with something else he couldn't place, something slightly stale. Mr. Dietrich led him through the kitchen to a door that opened onto a staircase leading down. As they descended, Mr. Dietrich explained that the basement was fully separate, with its own entrance through a side door outside, but he wanted to show Marcus through the house first so he could see the layout properly. The stairs creaked under their weight. At the bottom, Marcus found himself in a small but functional space. The ceiling was low, he could reach up and touch it, but it wasn't claustrophobic. To the left was a bedroom barely big enough for the double bed and dresser already inside. Straight ahead was a tiny bathroom with a shower stall. To the right was a kitchenette, mini fridge, hot plate, microwave, sink. And directly across from the stairs, set into the far wall, was a door. It was different from the others, heavier, windowless, and secured with a padlock that looked like it could survive a hurricane. Marcus's eyes lingered on it, and he asked what was behind that door. Mr. Dietrich answered quickly, too quickly, saying it was a laundry room, storage, not part of the rental. Marcus turned his attention back to the suite, noting that it was actually really nice. It was small, sure, but it was clean and warm. The furniture was old but sturdy. The bathroom had hot water, he could hear the pipes humming. For $400, it was a miracle. Mr. Dietrich nodded, but his expression had shifted. The polite smile was gone, replaced by something heavier, more serious. He clasped his hands together, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something that sounded almost like a plea. He told Marcus there was one rule, only one. Marcus looked up, waiting, and Mr. Dietrich pointed at the locked door, telling him to never open that door, never try to open it, never ask why it was locked. He asked Marcus if he understood. The air in the basement suddenly felt thicker. Marcus laughed, nervously, saying sure, it was Mr. Dietrich's storage, not his business. But Mr. Dietrich didn't laugh. He stepped closer, and Marcus could see something in the older man's eyes, something that looked disturbingly like fear. The landlord said he needed Marcus to promise him. This wasn't a suggestion, he insisted. If Marcus lived here, he could never open that door. Marcus's rational mind kicked in immediately. Okay, weird. Probably stores something valuable. Maybe he's got expensive tools in there, or old family heirlooms, or let's be honest, maybe something illegal. Doesn't matter. Not my problem. I just need a place to sleep. Marcus promised he wouldn't touch it. Mr. Dietrich studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He explained the terms. $400 a month. Due on the 1st. Utilities included. Month-to-month lease. Marcus could move in today if he'd like. The word today sent a wave of relief through Marcus so strong it almost made him dizzy. He agreed, immediately, thanking Mr. Dietrich profusely. They went back upstairs to sign the lease. Marcus barely read it. He was too focused on the fact that he wasn't going to be homeless. Mr. Dietrich handed him 2 keys. One for the side entrance, one for the suite's interior door. Not one for the padlocked room, Marcus noticed. But that was fine. He didn't need it. As Marcus headed back to his car to grab his things, Mr. Dietrich called after him. He turned to see the older man standing in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, his expression unreadable. Mr. Dietrich repeated that he meant what he said. Don't open that door. Marcus nodded, assuring him he wouldn't. But as he drove away to pack up his old apartment, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a question he couldn't quite silence. What the hell is he hiding in there? By 8 p.m., Marcus's entire life fit into 6 cardboard boxes and 2 duffel bags. It was depressing, seeing everything he owned stacked in the corner of the basement suite. 22 years of existence, condensed, but he was too exhausted to feel sorry for himself. He'd spent the last 4 hours packing, hauling, driving, and unpacking, all while running on 3 hours of sleep and a gas station energy drink. Now, standing in the middle of his new bedroom, he felt the weight of the last week finally crash down on him. He had a place to live. He wasn't going to be homeless. He could breathe. Marcus collapsed onto the bed without bothering to change clothes. The mattress was firmer than he expected, but it was clean, and it was his. He stared up at the low ceiling, listening to the house settle around him. Old houses made noises, he knew that. Creaks and groans, pipes expanding and contracting, the hum of the furnace kicking on. Normal sounds. But his eyes kept drifting to the door. The locked laundry room was directly across from his bedroom, maybe 15 feet away. Even in the dim light from his bedside lamp, he could see the padlock glinting. He'd walked past it a dozen times while moving his stuff in, and each time, he'd felt a strange pull, not curiosity, exactly, but awareness. Like the door was watching him. He told himself to stop being paranoid. It was just a storage room. Old houses were creepy. That was normal. He rolled over, facing the wall, and closed his eyes. Sleep came fast, dragged him under like a riptide. But even in his dreams, he could feel the presence of that door, waiting. Marcus woke to his alarm at 6:30 a.m., groggy but functional. His first full day in the new place. He had class at 9, then a shift at the library where he'd picked up a few hours shelving books. Not enough to live on, but it was something. He needed routine, needed to prove to himself that everything was going to be okay now. He showered, dressed, made instant coffee in the kitchenette. The basement was quiet. In the early morning, almost too quiet. No sounds from upstairs, no traffic noise from outside, just the hum of the mini fridge and the occasional drip from the bathroom faucet. And that smell. Marcus paused, coffee mug halfway to his lips. There was a smell in the air, faint, but noticeable now that he was paying attention. Musty, like old water damage, or maybe something organic, something that had been left to rot in a closed space for too long. His eyes went to the locked door. It's probably just mildew, he thought. Old basement, poor ventilation. I'll ask Mr. Dietrich about it later. Maybe he can air it out or something. But even as he thought it, he remembered the warning. Never ask me why it's locked. Marcus shook his head, grabbed his backpack, and headed out through the side entrance. The morning air was cold and sharp, a welcome contrast to the stale atmosphere of the basement. He locked the door behind him and walked to his car, telling himself that the smell was nothing. The door was nothing. Everything was fine. He didn't notice the scratches on the outside of the locked door, thin, frantic lines carved into the wood, as if something inside had been trying desperately to claw its way out. The first week passed in a blur of classes, shifts at the library, and the slow process of settling into a new rhythm. Marcus told himself he was adjusting. The basement was quiet, the rent was cheap, and Mr. Dietrich left him alone. He'd see the older man occasionally passing on the driveway or through the window as Mr. Dietrich worked in his small garden, but they didn't talk much beyond polite nods. That was fine. Marcus didn't need a chatty landlord. He needed stability. But the door wouldn't let him forget it was there. It started small. Little things that his rational mind could easily explain away. The padlock, for instance, it looked old, rusted at the edges, like it had been there for years. But the door frame around it looked newer, cleaner, as if the door had been replaced recently, or reinforced. Maybe there was a break-in, Marcus thought. Maybe that's why he's so paranoid about it. Then there was the smell. It hadn't gone away. If anything, it had gotten stronger. By the end of the first week, Marcus could smell it the moment he walked into the suite, a thick, organic odor that seemed to seep from the direction of the locked room. Not mildew. Something else. Something that made his stomach turn if he thought about it too long. He bought an air freshener. It didn't help. On the 6th day, Marcus noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. He was carrying groceries down the stairs when he saw it. A scratch mark on the outside of the locked door. Not just one, several. Thin, jagged lines, gouged into the wood, clustered around the handle. They were deep, deliberate, and they hadn't been there when he moved in. He was sure of it. Marcus set the groceries down and crouched in front of the door, running his fingers over the scratches. They were rough, splintered, and they angled outward, as if something inside had been dragging its nails against the wood, trying to get out. His heart started to beat faster. No, that doesn't make sense. Maybe they were always there and I just didn't notice. Or maybe Mr. Dietrich's dog scratched it. Does he have a dog? I don't think he has a dog. Marcus stood up quickly, grabbed his groceries, and went into his room. He didn't look at the door again that night. The next evening, Marcus decided to do what any rational person would do: research. He sat on his bed with his laptop, typing the address into Google. Property records came up first, built in 1987, owned by Gerald Dietrich since 1995. No red flags. No news stories about murders or hauntings or mysterious disappearances. Just a normal house in a normal neighborhood. He tried a different approach. He searched for basement apartment rentals at the address, scrolling through cached Craigslist ads. The same listing appeared multiple times over the past 2 years, always worded slightly differently, always posted after a few months' gap. Okay, so he's had tenants before, Marcus thought. That's normal. People move out. College students graduate, get new jobs, whatever. But something about it nagged at him. He opened Facebook, typed in the address, and started searching through tagged locations. Nothing. He tried Instagram. Still nothing. Then, on a whim, he searched for basement apartment along with the street name. One result popped up. A profile. Tyler Brennan, 24 years old, shaggy brown hair, wide smile in his profile picture. His page was public. Marcus scrolled through the posts, his pulse quickening. 8 months ago, Tyler had posted a photo of a key with a caption about finally finding a place he could afford, mentioning it was a basement suite. Kind of creepy, but whatever. Adding that beggars couldn't be choosers. Marcus stared at the screen. That was the last post on Tyler's page. No updates after that. No photos, no check-ins, nothing. The account was still active. Marcus could see it, but it was like Tyler had just stopped. He probably just quit social media, Marcus told himself. People do that all the time. Digital detox or whatever. But his hands were shaking as he closed the laptop. That night, Marcus lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince himself that everything was fine. Tyler had moved out. The scratches were old. The smell was just mildew. The padlock was just a landlord being overly cautious. But then he heard it. A sound, faint, muffled, coming from the direction of the locked door, shuffling. Marcus sat up, his breath catching in his throat. He listened, straining to hear over the pounding of his own heartbeat. There it was again. A soft, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across a concrete floor. It's the pipes, he told himself. Old houses have noisy pipes. It's the furnace. It's settling. But the sound didn't stop. It continued, rhythmic and deliberate, for nearly a minute before fading into silence. Marcus didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he ran into his upstairs neighbor, a woman in her 50s walking her dog past the house. Marcus flagged her down, trying to sound casual. He apologized for bothering her and mentioned that he'd just moved into the basement suite, asking if she'd lived in the neighborhood long. The woman's smile faltered. She asked if he was renting from Mr. Dietrich. Marcus confirmed he was, commenting that it was a nice place, quiet. She glanced at the house, then back at him. Her expression had shifted, something guarded in her eyes now. She asked how long he'd been there. About a week, Marcus told her. She nodded slowly, then tugged her dog's leash, wishing him good luck. She started to walk away. Marcus called after her, asking if she knew anything about the previous tenant, a guy named Tyler. The woman stopped. She didn't turn around. She said she didn't know anything about that. Marcus pressed, asking if Tyler had the woman, cut him off, repeating louder that she didn't know anything. Then she walked away quickly, her dog trotting beside her. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, watching her go, a cold knot forming in his stomach. But the sounds were just the beginning of what Marcus would discover, and by the time he understood what was really behind that door, it would already be too late. Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Tyler Brennan. For 3 days, the name haunted him. It whispered through his lectures, echoed in the silence of the library stacks, where he shelved books, and screamed in the darkness of the basement suite when he tried to sleep. Tyler's frozen social media profile, that last post about the basement suite, that casual joke about beggars and choosers, felt less like a coincidence and more like a warning Marcus had been too desperate to heed. He told himself he was being paranoid. People abandoned social media all the time. Maybe Tyler got a girlfriend who hated Instagram. Maybe he went off-grid. Maybe he just grew up and realized posting photos of his breakfast was a waste of time. There were 1,000 rational explanations, but none of them explained the scratches on the door. Marcus sat in the university library on a Wednesday afternoon, his laptop open, his coffee cold, surrounded by students who had no idea their classmate was unraveling. He'd started a document titled Basement Research. Innocent enough if anyone glanced over his shoulder, but the contents were anything but innocent. He'd found Tyler's full profile by now. Tyler Brennan, 24, graduated from the same university 2 years ago with a degree in graphic design. His Facebook showed a normal life. Photos with friends, complaints about student loans, shares of memes and music videos. Then, 8 months ago, that post about the basement suite. Then nothing. Complete radio silence. Marcus clicked through Tyler's friend list, looking for someone who might know what happened to him. Most of the downed profiles were locked down, but he found one, a guy named Derek Chen, whose page was public and showed recent activity. Derek had been tagged in several of Tyler's old photos. They looked close. Roommates, maybe, or childhood friends. Marcus opened a new message window and stared at the blank screen. What was he supposed to say? "Hi, I'm living in the same basement your friend disappeared from. Do you know if he's dead?" He typed, "Hey Derek, I know this is random, but I'm trying to get in touch with Tyler Brennan. Do you know how I can reach him?" His finger hovered over the send button. This was crazy. He was acting like some conspiracy theorist, chasing ghosts because of a weird smell and some scratches on a door. Tyler probably just moved across the country and forgot to update his social media. This was a waste of time. But then Marcus remembered the neighbor's face when he'd mentioned Tyler's name. That guarded expression, that quick retreat. She knew something. She had to. He hit to send. The response came faster than he expected. Within 20 minutes, Derek had replied, "Who is this?" Marcus typed back, "My name's Marcus. I'm renting a basement suite and found some of Tyler's old posts about living in the area. Just wanted to reach out." 3 dots appeared, indicating Derek was typing. They disappeared. Appeared again. Disappeared. Marcus watched the screen, his heart rate climbing. Finally, a message came through. "If you're living where I think you're living, you need to get out. Now." Marcus's blood went cold. He typed with shaking fingers. "What do you mean?" The 3 dots appeared again, stayed for almost a minute. Then, "Tyler went missing 8 months ago. Police said he probably just took off, but that's bullshit. He wouldn't do that. Last time I talked to him, he said something was wrong with that place. Said his landlord was acting weird. Said there were noises at night. Then he stopped answering his phone. When I went to check on him, the landlord said he'd moved out in the middle of the night. Didn't leave a forwarding address. Didn't take his security deposit. Just gone." Marcus read the message 3 times, each word sinking deeper into his chest like stones. He typed, "Did you go to the police?" Derek's response was bitter. "Yeah. They didn't give a shit. Tyler's an adult. Adults are allowed to disappear. They did a welfare check. Landlord said he moved out. Case closed. I tried to push it, but they said without evidence of foul play, there was nothing they could do. I even tried to get into that basement myself, but the landlord threatened to call the cops on me for trespassing." Marcus's hands were trembling now. He asked, "What was the address?" Derek sent it. It was Marcus's address. Then Derek added, "Get out of there, man. I don't know what's going on in that house, but Tyler was scared before he disappeared. Really scared. And he wasn't the type to scare easy." Marcus closed his laptop, his mind racing. Tyler had lived in this exact suite, had slept in this exact bed, had stared at that exact locked door. And then he'd vanished, and no one had cared enough to find out why. But Tyler wasn't the only one, Marcus realized. The Craigslist ads had appeared multiple times over 2 years. How many other people had lived here? How many had left? And how many had left willingly? That evening, Marcus did something he knew he shouldn't do. He went looking for the other tenants. He started with the cached Craigslist ads, pulling up every instance of the basement rental over the past 3 years. Each ad had a different phone number, Mr. Dietrich must have cycled through burner phones, but the wording was always similar. Basement suite, cheap rent, available immediately, quiet tenant preferred. Marcus cross-referenced the posting dates with local news archives, searching for missing persons reports. Nothing came up directly, but he found something else. A Reddit thread from 14 months ago titled, "Weird Landlord. Situation. Need advice." The post had been deleted, but the comments were still visible. The original poster username TempAccount847 had described renting a basement suite from an older man who had one strange rule: never open a locked door in the basement. The poster said they'd been hearing noises at night, smelling something awful, and feeling increasingly paranoid. The comments were mostly jokes and dismissive advice, but one user had replied, "Dude, I think I know where you're talking about. If it's the house on Maple Street, get out. My cousin lived there and disappeared." Maple Street, Marcus's street. He clicked on the commenter's profile, but it had been deleted. He clicked on temp account 847, also deleted. Marcus sat back, his mind reeling. How many people had lived in this basement? How many had posted online, looking for help, only to be ignored or mocked? How many had disappeared? And what the hell was behind that door? Marcus decided to confront Mr. Dietrich the next morning. He'd spent the entire night rehearsing what he'd say. He'd be calm, rational, non-accusatory. He'd simply ask about the previous tenants, mention that he'd been having trouble sleeping because of strange noises, and see how the landlord reacted. If Mr. Dietrich got defensive or evasive, that would tell Marcus everything he needed to know. But when Marcus climbed the stairs to the main house and knocked on the door, his carefully prepared speech evaporated. Mr. Dietrich answered, looking older than Marcus remembered. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed, and there was a tremor in his hands that hadn't been there before. He asked if everything was all right with the suite. Marcus opened his mouth to ask about Tyler, about the noises, about the door. But what came out instead was a simple question. "Are you okay, Mr.?" Dietrich blinked, surprised. He said he was fine, just tired, and asked again if there was a problem with the rental. Marcus hesitated. The old man looked so frail, so genuinely exhausted, that the accusations Marcus had prepared felt suddenly cruel. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe Tyler really had just moved out. Maybe the noises were just pipes. Maybe Marcus was losing his mind over nothing. He told Mr. Dietrich that everything was fine. He just wanted to ask about the previous tenant, if there was anything he should know about the suite's quirks or maintenance issues. Mr. Dietrich's expression shifted. The exhaustion was replaced by something sharper, more alert. He asked why Marcus wanted to know about previous tenants. Marcus tried to sound casual, saying he'd just been curious, that he'd found some old posts online about the place and wondered if there were any recurring problems he should be aware of. The landlord's jaw tightened. He said the previous tenants had all left on good terms, that there were no problems with the suite, and that Marcus shouldn't believe everything he read on the internet. But there was something in Mr. Dietrich's voice, now an edge, almost defensive, that made Marcus's instincts flare. He pressed further, asking specifically about Tyler Brennan, saying he'd heard the name and wondered if Mr. Dietrich remembered him. The old man's face went pale. He asked where Marcus had heard that name. Marcus said he'd found it online, in some old posts about the neighborhood. Mr. Dietrich stepped back from the door, his trembling hands gripping the frame. He said that Tyler had been a troubled young man who'd left in the middle of the night without notice, that he'd seemed unstable toward the end, and that Mr. Dietrich had been worried about him, but there was nothing he could do. Marcus asked if Mr. Dietrich had reported Tyler missing. The landlord's eyes narrowed. He said there was nothing to report, that Tyler was an adult who chose to leave, and that it wasn't his responsibility to track down former tenants. Then he asked Marcus if there was anything else, because he had things to do. The dismissal was clear. Marcus apologized for bothering him and turned to leave. But as he walked away, he heard Mr. Dietrich call after him. He turned back. The old man was standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, and he reminded Marcus of the rule, the one rule: never open that door. Marcus said he remembered. Mr. Dietrich nodded slowly, then added something that made Marcus's blood run cold. He said that the rule existed for Marcus's protection, not his own, and that if Marcus valued his safety, he'd stop asking questions and leave things alone. Then he closed the door. Marcus stood on the porch for a long moment, his heart pounding. That hadn't been a warning, that had been a threat. He walked back to the basement entrance, his mind racing. Mr. Dietrich knew something. The way he'd reacted to Tyler's name, the way he deflected and dismissed it, was the behavior of someone hiding something. And that final warning about Marcus's safety, that wasn't the concern of a worried landlord. That was the desperation of someone trying to keep a secret buried. But what secret? What was behind that door that was worth threatening a tenant over? Marcus descended the stairs to his suite, and the smell hit him immediately. It had gotten worse. Much worse. The organic, rotting odor was so thick now that it made his eyes water. He'd been trying to ignore it, trying to convince himself it was just mildew or old food or something mundane, but there was no ignoring it anymore. That smell was coming from behind the locked door, and it smelled like death. The noises started getting worse that night. Marcus lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the sounds coming from the locked room. It wasn't just shuffling anymore. Now there were other sounds, scraping, thumping, and something else, something that sounded disturbingly like whimpering. He told himself it was his imagination, told himself that fear and paranoia were making him hear things that weren't there. But the sounds continued, rhythmic and deliberate, for over an hour. At 2 a.m., Marcus couldn't take it anymore. He got out of bed, grabbed his phone, and opened the voice recorder app. If he was going crazy, at least he'd have proof. And if he wasn't crazy, if there really was something behind that door, then he needed evidence. He crept across the basement, his phone held out in front of him, and stood directly in front of the locked door. The sounds were clearer now, definitely scraping, definitely movement, and underneath it all, a low, continuous sound that might have been breathing or might have been wind through a crack in the foundation. Marcus hit record and waited. For 5 minutes, he stood there in the darkness, barely breathing, while his phone captured the sounds. The scraping continued. The thumping came in irregular intervals, and once, just once, he heard something that sounded like a voice. Muffled, distant, but unmistakably human. His hands started shaking so badly, he almost dropped the phone. He stopped the recording, backed away from the door, and retreated to his bedroom. He locked the door, though he knew it wouldn't stop anything if something really wanted to get in, and sat on his bed, listening to the playback. The recording was clear. The sounds were real. He wasn't imagining it. There was something behind that door, something alive. The next morning, Marcus made a decision. He was going to open that door. He knew it was a terrible idea. He knew it violated his lease, betrayed Mr. Dietrich's trust, and could get him evicted. But none of that mattered anymore. People had disappeared from this basement. Tyler Brennan had disappeared, and Marcus was increasingly certain that whatever was behind that door was the reason why. He couldn't go to the police. What would he tell them? That his landlord had a locked door and he heard noises? They'd laugh him out of the station. He needed proof. He needed to see what was behind that door, document it, and then he could go to the authorities with something concrete. But first, he needed to get past the padlock. Marcus went to a hardware store that afternoon and bought a bolt cutter. The clerk didn't ask questions, just rang him up and wished him a good day. Marcus drove back to the house, parked around the corner so Mr. Dietrich wouldn't see his car, and waited until evening when he knew the old man usually went out for his daily walk. At 6 p.m., Marcus saw Mr. Dietrich leave through the front door, moving slowly down the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets. Marcus waited 5 minutes to make sure he was really gone, then grabbed the bolt cutter from his trunk and headed to the basement entrance. His hands were shaking as he unlocked the side door and stepped inside. The smell hit him immediately worse than ever, thick and cloying. He gagged, pulled his shirt up over his nose, and approached the locked door. The padlock was heavy duty, but the bolt cutter was designed for exactly this kind of lock. Marcus positioned the blades around the shackle, took a deep breath, and squeezed. The metal resisted for a moment, then gave way with a sharp crack that echoed through the basement like a gunshot. The padlock fell to the floor with a clatter. Marcus stood there, staring at the door, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. This was it, the point of no return. Once he opened this door, there was no going back. He reached for the handle. But what Marcus found behind that door wasn't just a secret, it was a nightmare that would shatter everything he thought he knew about the world, and about the man living upstairs. The door swung open with a long, agonized creak. Darkness spilled out like liquid, thick and absolute. Marcus fumbled for his phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it into the room beyond. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't a laundry room. It wasn't storage. It was a corridor. A long, narrow hallway that stretched back into the earth, far deeper than the foundation of the house should have allowed. The walls were rough concrete, water-stained and crumbling in places. The floor was dirt, packed hard from years of use, and running along the ceiling were exposed pipes and electrical wires, jury-rigged and dangerous-looking. But that wasn't what made Marcus's skin crawl. It was the doors. There were 3 of them, evenly spaced along the left side of the corridor. Heavy metal doors, the kind you'd see in a prison or a bunker. Each one had a small window at eye level, reinforced with wire mesh, and each one was secured with multiple locks. Marcus took a step forward, his legs moving on autopilot even as his brain screamed at him to run. The smell was overpowering now, rot and waste and something chemical, like bleach mixed with decay. He pulled his shirt tighter over his nose and moved deeper into the corridor. The first door was closest. Marcus approached it slowly, his flashlight beam shaking, and peered through the wire mesh window. The room beyond was small, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet. The walls were bare concrete. There was a bucket in one corner, a thin mattress on the floor, and nothing else, except for the scratches. The walls were covered in them. Hundreds of scratches, gouged deep into the concrete, clustered around the door and spreading outward like desperate fingers. Some of them formed words, barely legible. "Help, please, let me out." And in the corner, written in what looked like dried blood, "Tyler." Marcus stumbled backward, his phone nearly slipping from his hand. Tyler had been here. Tyler had been locked in this room, scratching at the walls, begging for help. And then what? Had he died here? Had Mr. Dietrich let him starve? Marcus forced himself to move to the second door. This room was identical to the first, but the scratches were older, the messages more faded. He could make out a name, Sarah, and a date, 2023. The third door was the worst. Marcus looked through the window and saw that this room wasn't empty. There was someone inside, a figure huddled in the corner, back against the wall, knees pulled up to their chest. They were filthy, emaciated, their hair long and matted. They didn't move when Marcus's flashlight beam hit them, didn't react at all. Marcus's voice came out as a strangled whisper. He asked if they could hear him. The figure's head lifted slowly. Their faces were gaunt, eyes sunken and hollow, but they were alive. Barely, but alive. Marcus's hands shook as he examined the locks on the door. There were 3 of them, heavy-duty deadbolts that required keys he didn't have. He told the person inside to hold on, that he was going to get them out, that he was going to call the police. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling over the screen, and dialed 911. The call didn't connect. Marcus stared at his phone. No signal. He was underground, surrounded by concrete and earth. Of course, there was no signal. He told the person in the room that he'd be right back, that he just needed to get upstairs to call for help. He turned to run back down the corridor and came face to face with Mr. Dietrich. The old man was standing at the entrance to the corridor, blocking the only exit. His expression was no longer kind or grandfatherly. It was cold, empty, the face of someone who'd done terrible things and felt nothing about it. He told Marcus he'd warned him, told him not to open the door, told him it was for his own protection. Marcus backed up, his mind racing. He asked what the hell this place was, what Mr. Dietrich had done to these people. The landlord stepped into the corridor, and Marcus saw that he was holding something, a syringe. Mr. Dietrich explained, his voice calm and measured, that he'd been doing this for a long time, that the world was full of desperate people, students, drifters, people no one would miss, that it was easy to make them disappear, that the basement suite was just bait, a way to lure them in, and once they were comfortable, once they'd settled in and let their guard down, it was simple to drug their food, drag them down here, and lock them away. Marcus asked why. Why would he do this? Mr. Dietrich's expression didn't change. He said it didn't matter why. What mattered was that Marcus had broken the one rule, and now there were consequences. He moved forward, syringe raised. Marcus ran. He sprinted down the corridor, past the locked rooms, looking desperately for another exit. There had to be another way out. This tunnel had to lead somewhere. Behind him, he could hear Mr. Dietrich's footsteps, slow and steady. The old man wasn't running. He didn't need to. He knew Marcus was trapped. The corridor ended in a wall, solid concrete, no door, no exit. Marcus spun around, his back against the wall, as Mr. Dietrich approached. The old man was still holding the syringe, his expression still eerily calm. He told Marcus that struggling would only make it worse, that if he cooperated, it would be quick and painless. Marcus's eyes darted around, looking for anything he could use as a weapon. His hand closed around something on the ground, a piece of broken pipe, rusted and heavy. When Mr. Dietrich lunged forward with the syringe, Marcus swung. The pipe connected with the old man's temple with a sickening crack. Mr. Dietrich dropped like a stone, the syringe clattering across the floor. Marcus stood there, gasping, staring at the crumpled body at his feet. He didn't know if Mr. Dietrich was unconscious or dead, and he didn't wait to find out. He ran back down the corridor, through the open door, across the basement suite, and up the stairs. He burst out of the side entrance into the cool evening air, fumbling for his phone. And this time, thank God, this time the call to 911 connected. He told the dispatcher there were people locked in a basement, that his landlord had been holding them prisoner, that she needed to send police and ambulances immediately. The dispatcher asked if he was in danger. Marcus looked back at the house, at the open basement door, and said he didn't know. But as sirens began to wail in the distance, Marcus realized that escaping the basement was only the beginning, because the truth about what Mr. Dietrich had been doing, and why, was far more horrifying than he could have ever imagined. The police arrived in waves first, 2 patrol cars, then 4, then an ambulance, then unmarked vehicles that Marcus assumed belonged to detectives. Within 20 minutes, the quiet suburban street had transformed into a crime scene that would make national headlines by morning. Marcus sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket wrapped around his shoulders, watching the chaos unfold. Officers were streaming in and out of the house, their faces grim. He'd seen 2 people carried out on stretchers, so far both alive, barely, their bodies so wasted they looked like concentration camp survivors. The paramedics had worked quickly, efficiently, but Marcus had seen the horror in their eyes. A detective approached him, a woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She introduced herself as Detective Sarah Reeves and asked if Marcus was able to answer some questions. He nodded, though his hands were still shaking so badly he had to clasp them together to keep them still. Detective Reeves sat down beside him, her voice gentle but professional. She asked him to start from the beginning, to tell her everything about how he'd found the rooms, what he'd seen, and what had happened with Mr. Dietrich. Marcus told her everything: the cheap rent, the locked door, the warning, the noises, Tyler Brennan's disappearance, the research, the confrontation, and finally, the decision to cut the padlock and see what was inside. He told her about the corridor, the 3 rooms, the scratches on the walls, the person he'd found alive in the 3rd cell. He told her about Mr. Dietrich appearing with the syringe, about the fight, about the pipe. When he finished, Detective Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked if Marcus had any idea how long this had been going on. Marcus shook his head, saying he'd only found evidence going back 2 or 3 years, but he suspected it had been much longer. The detective's expression darkened. She told him they'd found 4 people alive in those rooms. 4, not 3 like Marcus had seen. There was a 4th door further down the corridor that he hadn't reached. All 4 victims were severely malnourished, dehydrated, and traumatized. One of them had been down there for over 18 months. Marcus felt his stomach turn. 18 months, a year and a half locked in a concrete cell, scratching at walls, begging for help that never came. He asked about Mr. Dietrich. Detective Reeves said he was alive, currently in custody at the hospital with a police guard. He'd regained consciousness and immediately lawyered up, refusing to say anything. But it didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. The rooms, the victims, the basement suite, designed to lure in vulnerable people, it was all there. Then the detective asked Marcus something that made his blood run cold. She asked if he'd noticed anything else unusual about the house. Any other rooms? Any other areas that seemed off? Marcus asked why she wanted to know. Detective Reeves hesitated, then said they'd found something in the main house, a locked room on the 2nd floor. And when they'd opened it, they discovered something that suggested Mr. Dietrich's crimes went back much further than anyone had initially thought. She asked if Marcus wanted to know what they'd found. He wasn't sure he did, but he nodded anyway. Detective Reeves led Marcus into the house, now swarming with forensic technicians in white suits, photographers documenting every corner, and officers cataloging evidence. The smell of the basement still clung to his clothes, but up here, in the main house, there was a different smell. Old paper, dust, and something else. Something that reminded Marcus of a museum. They climbed the stairs to the second floor. At the end of the hallway was a door that had been forced open, its frame splintered. 2 officers stood guard outside. Detective Reeves nodded to them, and they stepped aside. She told Marcus he didn't have to go in if he didn't want to, that what was inside was disturbing, but she thought he deserved to know the full scope of what he'd uncovered. Marcus stepped through the door. The room was large, taking up what should have been 2 bedrooms. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with photographs. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. All of them showed people. Young people, mostly. Students, drifters, the kind of faces you'd see on missing person posters. But these weren't missing person posters. These were trophies. Each photograph was labeled with a name, a date, and a number. Marcus moved closer, his legs feeling like they might give out. The dates went back decades. The earliest one he could see was from 1987, the year Mr. Dietrich had bought the house. 38 years. He'd been doing this for 38 years. Detective Reeves pointed to a wall on the left, explaining that those were the ones they'd identified so far. 17 confirmed missing persons cases spanning 3 decades. 17 people who'd vanished without a trace, whose families had spent years wondering what happened to them, who'd been written off as runaways or victims of their own bad choices, and they'd all been here. In this house, in those rooms. Marcus's eyes landed on a photograph near the center of the wall. A young man with shaggy brown hair and a wide smile. Tyler Brennan. The date beneath his photo read, March 2024, 8 months ago. Exactly when Tyler's social media had gone silent. Marcus asked what had happened to him, his voice barely above a whisper. Detective Reeves said they didn't know yet. Tyler wasn't among the survivors they'd found, which meant he was either dead or he'd been moved somewhere else. They were searching the property now, looking for burial sites. The room seemed to tilt. Marcus grabbed the door frame to steady himself. Burial sites. They were looking for bodies. Multiple bodies. This wasn't just kidnapping and false imprisonment. This was serial murder on a scale that defied comprehension. He asked how Mr. Dietrich had gotten away with it for so long. The detective explained that he'd been careful, methodical. He'd targeted people who wouldn't be missed, students between semesters, drifters passing through town, people estranged from their families. He'd kept them alive for months, sometimes years, before they died from neglect or illness, or simply gave up. And when they died, he'd disposed of the bodies somewhere off the property. They were still trying to figure out where. But the most chilling part, Detective Reeves said, was that Mr. Dietrich had been doing this in plain sight. He'd been a member of the community for nearly 4 decades. He'd paid his taxes, mowed his lawn, waved to his neighbors. No one had suspected a thing. Marcus thought about the neighbor he'd talked to, the woman who'd walked away when he mentioned Tyler's name. She'd known something was wrong, but she hadn't said anything, hadn't done anything. How many other people had suspected? How many had chosen to look the other way? Over the next few days, the full scope of the horror emerged. The 4 survivors were identified. One of them was a 23-year-old woman named Emma Cortez, who'd been reported missing 14 months ago. Another was a 19-year-old named Jason Park, who disappeared 6 months ago. The third was a man in his 30s named David Huang, who'd been missing for 18 months, the longest of the survivors. And the fourth, the one Marcus hadn't seen, was a 17-year-old runaway named Mia Santos, who'd been in that basement for 3 months. All of them were hospitalized in critical condition. All of them would need years of physical and psychological recovery. But they were alive. And that was because Marcus had refused to ignore the warning signs, had refused to accept the easy explanations, had refused to leave that door unopened. The media descended on the story like vultures. House of Horrors. The basement killer. Decades of disappearances solved. Marcus's name was everywhere, hailed as a hero, the brave student who'd risked his life to save 4 people from a monster. But Marcus didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who'd barely survived a nightmare. The university offered him counseling. His professors offered extensions on his assignments. His friends, the few he had reached out with, messages of support. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been seconds away from becoming another photograph on Mr. Dietrich's wall. Another name with a date and a number. Another person who'd vanished and been forgotten. He couldn't go back to the basement suite. Obviously. The entire property was a crime scene now, cordoned off with yellow tape and guarded around the clock. The university had arranged temporary housing for him in the dorms, but Marcus couldn't sleep there either. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those scratches on the walls, heard those sounds from behind the door, felt Mr. Dietrich's cold, empty stare. 3 weeks after the rescue, Marcus received a call from Detective Reeves. She asked if he could come down to the station. There was something she needed to tell him. Marcus sat across from Detective Reeves in a small interview room, a cup of coffee he hadn't touched cooling between them. The detective looked exhausted. The case had consumed her department, spawned a multi-state task force, and generated more leads than they could possibly follow. But she'd wanted to update Marcus personally. He deserved that much. She told him they'd found the burial site. It was on a property Mr. Dietrich owned 40 miles outside the city, a small plot of land he'd inherited from his parents in the 90s. The forensic team had been excavating for a week. So far, they'd recovered the remains of 11 people. They expected to find more. Marcus asked if Tyler was among them. Detective Reeves nodded. Tyler Brennan had been buried there 7 months ago. Cause of death was starvation and dehydration. He'd been kept in that basement for 3 weeks before he died. Marcus closed his eyes, fighting back the wave of nausea. 3 weeks. Tyler had been alive down there for 3 weeks, scratching at the walls, begging for help, while Mr. Dietrich went about his daily routine upstairs, watering his garden, waving to neighbors, living a normal life, while someone died in agony beneath his feet. The detective continued, explaining that they'd also identified most of the other victims from the photographs. The final count was 23 confirmed victims over 38 years. 23 people who'd been lured in by the promise of cheap rent and a place to sleep. 23 people who'd been locked in those rooms, kept alive for months or years, and then disposed of when they were no longer useful. Marcus asked what would happen to Mr. Dietrich. Detective Reeves said he'd been charged with 23 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of kidnapping, and dozens of other charges. He'd spend the rest of his life in prison. There would be no plea deal, no reduced sentence. The evidence was too overwhelming, the crimes too monstrous. But then she told Marcus something that made his blood run cold. During the interrogation, after days of silence, Mr. Dietrich had finally spoken. He'd asked to see Marcus. Specifically, said he had something he wanted to tell him. Marcus asked why the detective was telling him this. She said it was his choice. He didn't have to go. He didn't owe Mr. Dietrich anything, but she thought Marcus might want closure, might want to look the man in the eye and hear whatever twisted justification he'd come up with for his crimes. Marcus sat in silence for a long moment. Then he asked when he could see him. The prison interview room was small, sterile, and separated by a thick pane of reinforced glass. Marcus sat on one side, his hands clenched in his lap. On the other side, wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, sat Gerald Dietrich. The old man looked smaller than Marcus remembered, frailer, but his eyes were the same, cold, empty, devoid of remorse. Mr. Dietrich picked up the phone on his side of the glass. Marcus hesitated, then picked up his own. The old man spoke first, thanking Marcus for coming, saying he knew it couldn't have been easy. Marcus asked what he wanted. Mr. Dietrich smiled a thin, joyless expression. He said he wanted Marcus to understand that the media had painted him as a monster. But it wasn't that simple. Nothing ever was. Marcus told him he didn't want to hear excuses, but Mr. Dietrich continued anyway. He explained that he'd started in 1987. After his wife left him, he'd been lonely, desperate for control over something in his life. The first one had been an accident, a drifter who'd responded to a rental ad, who'd been rude and disrespectful. Mr. Dietrich had drugged him, locked him up, told himself it was temporary. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and eventually, the man had died. And Mr. Dietrich had realized he liked it. The power, the control, the knowledge that he held someone's entire existence in his hands. So he'd done it again, and again, and again. For 38 years, Marcus felt sick. He asked why Mr. Dietrich was telling him this. The old man leaned forward, his eyes locked on Marcus's. He said it was because Marcus had been different, special. He'd seen something in Marcus, a strength, a determination that the others hadn't had. And he'd wanted to see if Marcus would break the pattern, if he'd be the one who escaped. And he had. Marcus had opened the door, fought back, and survived. He'd done what 23 others couldn't. Mr. Dietrich said he was proud of him. Marcus slammed the phone down and walked out without another word. 6 months later, Marcus graduated in the spring. He walked across the stage, accepted his diploma, and smiled for the obligatory photos. His family was there, his mother crying, his younger sister cheering, his father looking proud. They'd flown in from across the country to watch him achieve what he'd worked so hard for. But as Marcus stood there, holding his diploma, he couldn't help thinking about Tyler Brennan, about Emma Cortez, and Jason Park, and David Huang, and Mia Santos, about the 17 others who'd never gotten the chance to graduate, to move forward, to live. The 4 survivors were still recovering. Emma had returned to her family in Texas. Jason was in intensive therapy in California. David was learning to walk again after months of muscle atrophy. Mia was in foster care, trying to rebuild a life that had been shattered before it really began. They would carry the scars of what happened to them for the rest of their lives. Marcus would too. He'd moved into a new apartment above ground, with windows, in a building with multiple exits. He still couldn't sleep with the lights off. Still woke up in the middle of the night, convinced he could hear scratching sounds from behind the walls. Still checked and rechecked the locks on his doors. But he was alive. He'd survived. And he'd saved 4 people in the process. That had to count for something. As Marcus left the graduation ceremony, his phone buzzed with a news alert. Gerald Dietrich had been sentenced to 23 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He would die in prison. Marcus deleted the notification and kept walking. He had a future to build, and he wasn't going to let a monster from his past take that away from him.